Christmas that year didn't begin with the sound of carols or the warm smell of gingerbread. It began with words so sharp they cut deeper than any blade. I remember it vividly. The evening of December 24th, the chandelier light stretched long shadows across the living room walls. The faint scent of pine from our newly decorated Christmas tree mixed uneasily with the heavy burn of whiskey. I stepped into the hallway carrying a tray of appetizers when I heard laughter, low, smug, poisonous. "She'll fall apart at the table, Max," my husband said with absolute certainty. His best friend, Jacob, barked out a laugh and slapped him on the back. $50 isn't enough. I'll make it 100. She'll cry and beg before you even finish reading the papers. Their words slammed into me like ice water. They weren't talking about some office bet or a football game. They were gambling on my humiliation. My pain was entertainment to them. I froze. The tray trembled in my hands, heavy with stuffed mushrooms and cheese puffs, but I forced it steady. 7 years of marriage had trained me well to keep smiling when my chest felt crushed, to breathe evenly when my world tilted, to never let my hands shake no matter what was breaking inside me. That night, those unwanted skills kept me from dropping everything right there on the floor. I eased backward, careful not to let them hear me. In the kitchen, the oven light glowed golden on the turkey. My mother, busy basting, didn't look up when she asked, "They need more appetizers." "They're fine," I said, setting the untouched tray on the counter. My voice was steady, normal. No one would guess I'd just overheard my husband and his best friend plan my destruction. I leaned against the wall for a moment, staring at the ceiling as my pulse thundered. I wasn't surprised, not really. Living with Max for 7 years had already taught me how little my worth meant to him, but still hearing it laid out so plainly, so cruelly on the night before Christmas, it carved something open in me. Before we dive into true revenge stories, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Hearing from people around the world makes these stories even more powerful and reminds us how connected we all are. That morning had already hinted at what was coming. Max sat at the breakfast table scrolling his tablet, criticizing the coffee as too weak, even though I'd made it the same way every day for years. His wedding band caught the light when he waved his hand dismissively. It hung loose now, as if even his body wanted to shed this marriage. He mentioned a budget meeting, though the office was closed for the holiday. And the cologne he wore, sharp expensive, not the one I'd bought, clung to him like someone else's claim. I had noticed the gym sessions, the late nights, the jewelry receipts tucked carelessly in his jacket. I'd swallowed my suspicions, tucked them away like so many of his harsh words. But tonight confirmed everything, the affairs, the lies, the performance he had scripted. His big finale wasn't a toast or a family announcement. It was serving me divorce papers in front of everyone I loved, and Jacob. He wasn't just a spectator, he was part of the show. He'd be recording my tears, my pleading, my shame. They thought they had already written the ending, the weak wife humiliated on Christmas Day. "Women are so predictable," Max sneered from the living room. My fingers curled so tightly my nails bit into my skin. They thought I'd break. They thought I'd beg. But something inside me shifted at that moment. Not a crack, but a solidifying. Like water turning to ice. I wasn't going to collapse. I wasn't going to cry for them. And I sure as hell wasn't going to play the role Max had scripted. Tomorrow at Christmas dinner, Max would stand tall with his envelope expecting to watch me fall apart. Jacob's camera would be waiting to capture every sob, every gasp. But I already knew the only performance happening tomorrow would be theirs. Because while Max thought he was the director of this play, I had already rewritten the script. The night before Christmas had given me clarity, but the truth had been whispering for months. If I looked back carefully, the signs were everywhere like breadcrumbs. I'd ignored, hoping they wouldn't lead to the reality I now faced. It started with the scent. Max had always worn the same cologne I'd bought him on our 3rd anniversary. Subtle woody, the kind of fragrance that suited him even when everything else about our marriage felt strained. But 3 months ago he began coming home with a new scent, clinging to his clothes, sharper, expensive, bold. At first I thought maybe a client had brushed against him, or maybe it was a free sample from a department store. But when I found the half-used bottle shoved into his gym bag, the price tag still attached, I knew he hadn't bought it for me. Someone else had chosen it for him, someone who didn't know or didn't care that strong fragrances triggered his migraines. Then there was the receipt. While helping him dress one evening, my hand slipped into his jacket pocket. I felt a folded slip of paper and pulled it out before he could notice. A $200 purchase from Meridian Jewelers. A diamond tennis bracelet. The date was just last week. 7 years of marriage, and I'd never worn a single diamond he'd given me. Even our anniversary gifts had been practical things, kitchenware, a new vacuum, never jewelry. I tucked the receipt back as if smoothing his pocket, all while my pulse hammered in my ears. Everywhere I looked there were cracks. He complained about the food I cooked, though it was the same meals he used to praise. He criticized my clothes, my voice, even the way I breathed when I stood too close. "Stop hovering," he'd snap, as though my very presence was an intrusion. I learned to fold my hands at my waist, to shrink, to make myself small whenever his mood darkened. Our apartment, once a home, had become a stage where I played the role of the obedient wife, applauded only when I stayed silent. But the most telling sign came not from Max, but from Elena. She showed up one afternoon carrying takeout bags, her smile too tight, her eyes full of the same concern I remembered from our college days. Back then she'd been the one to tell me when a boyfriend was cheating, the one who always noticed what I wanted to overlook. Some people call it intuition. Elena called it paying attention. We sat at the kitchen counter, the smell of sesame noodles filling the air, and she leaned in close. "I saw Max yesterday," she said softly, "downtown, at Lucia's." I tried to laugh it off. "Client lunch." Elena's look told me she wasn't joking. The client was wearing a red dress that barely counted as business attire, and she wasn't talking about mergers. She slid a business card across the counter. "My firm handles divorces. Discreetly. Just keep this. You don't have to use it." I stared at the card as if it were a lifeboat tossed into the ocean. My hands shook when I tucked it behind warranty papers in a drawer Max never opened. I wasn't ready to board yet, but knowing it was there gave me the first taste of something I hadn't felt in years: choice. After Elena left, the walls of the apartment seemed smaller than ever. The air was heavy, my every step echoing like I was a guest in my own life. I moved through the rooms, dusting surfaces that didn't need dusting, adjusting place settings that were already perfect, anything to avoid thinking too hard about the truth. But denial only lasts so long. The cologne, the bracelet, the late nights at the gym, the endless criticism. Each piece clicked into place, forming a picture I could no longer deny. Max wasn't just drifting away. He was planning his exit, and he wanted that exit to come at my expense, my dignity sacrificed as entertainment. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror that night, studying the woman looking back at me. She looked tired, yes, smaller than she once was, but there was still something fierce in her eyes, buried beneath the exhaustion. Something that Max had underestimated for far too long. If you're still watching, comment 1, so I know you're still with me. I whispered to my reflection, "You won't break. Not this time." The next morning would bring Christmas dinner, the grand stage Max had prepared. He believed he'd written the ending already, that I'd crumble, cry, beg. But he didn't know I'd been collecting the signs, the evidence, the truth. He didn't know I had an ally. And most of all, he didn't know that the woman he thought he had broken was already planning her comeback. The night that changed everything didn't arrive with a bang. It crept in quietly on the breath of whiskey and the sound of Max's laughter echoing through our apartment like nails against glass. It was late. The gala had ended hours earlier, and Max had stumbled home in a haze of expensive liquor and smug self-importance. He tossed his coat over a chair, poured himself another drink from the crystal decanter, and began his favorite sport, tearing me down. "You think you'd survive without me?" he slurred, leaning against his desk, glass in hand. "Without me, you're nothing. A nobody with a useless art degree and zero skills." The words weren't new. I'd heard variations of them for years, each one delivered with a sharper edge than the last. But that night, instead of piercing me, they hardened something inside. I listened in silence, every insult a brick laid into the foundation of a plan I hadn't dared admit I was building. Then, like arrogance always does, Max handed me a gift. "Maybe we should put something in writing," I said softly, my voice trembling just enough for him to mistake it as fear. "You always say I wouldn't survive without you. Maybe make it official, so I know where I stand." For a moment he just stared, then burst into raucous laughter so violent he nearly spilled his drink. "You want a contract? A post-nup after 7 years? Oh, Zoe, that's rich." He staggered to his desk, yanked open a drawer, and pulled out a yellow legal pad. "Fine. Let's make it official. Let's write down how pathetic you are." His pen scratched clumsily across the page. His handwriting, normally so precise, now looped wildly, letters uneven. He chuckled as he scribbled. "If I file for divorce, you get, let's be generous, 60%. But if I cheat, and let's be honest, that'd only be me, you get 70. He looked up at me with a cruel grin, waiting for the humiliation to sink in. I kept my face still, lips parted slightly, as if I were stunned. Inside, I was cataloging every stroke of his pen, every word dripping with intoxicated arrogance. He added more. I could have the Honda, not the BMW. My measly jewelry. Half his retirement fund, though he scoffed that he'd make triple in 5 years. Each clause meant to mock me, to remind me of my place. Finally, with a dramatic flourish, he signed his name and dated the bottom. Then, smirking, he ripped the page free and tossed it at my feet. "There you go, sweetheart. Your security blanket. Frame it. Sleep with it under your pillow. God knows you need something to cling to besides me." Minutes later, he collapsed onto the couch, snoring almost instantly, the legal pad abandoned on the floor. I bent down, picked it up, and held it like it was made of glass. The ink was still wet. His signature sprawled across the bottom, careless and bold. He thought it was nothing, a joke, but I knew better. In the kitchen, under the dim light above the counter, I spread it flat and pulled out my phone. I photographed it from every angle. Then I emailed it to myself, to my old college Gmail, to a new Proton Mail I'd set up, to 3 different cloud drives with 2-factor authentication. I wasn't just saving it. I was sealing it in a vault he could never touch. At 11:47 p.m., the timestamp glowed on my phone screen. Proof. When I came back, he was sprawled under the cashmere throw his mother had given us as a wedding gift. His face in sleep looked softer, almost innocent. It would have been easy to believe the man I'd once loved was still somewhere inside him. But then I remembered the laughter, the way he mocked me for even daring to ask for security, the way he turned my fear into a joke. That was the night I stopped being afraid. I fetched a notebook from the drawer, a cheap black and white marble composition book, and began writing. Legal consultation, asset documentation, evidence gathering. Each word steadied me like laying bricks in a wall he could never scale. The woman Max believed he'd broken, the one who used to cry in silence after his insults, that woman was gone. In her place was someone colder, sharper, patient enough to wait. Because when your enemy hands you a weapon while laughing at your weakness, you don't throw it away, you sharpen it. And that night, with Max's drunken scrawl clutched in my hand, I realized I was no longer just surviving. I was preparing for war. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, the kind of morning where the city looked like it had been drained of color. I sat in Elena's office clutching my tote bag, as if it were the last lifeboat on a sinking ship. Inside that bag, folded carefully in a plastic sleeve, was the yellow legal pad page Max had signed in drunken arrogance. Elena's office was sleek and quiet, the hum of the city muffled behind thick windows. She poured me coffee, strong black, before sliding the paper across her desk to the man waiting there. Richard Brennan, senior partner. His reputation in family law stretched further than I'd realized when Elena first mentioned him. Richard adjusted his reading glasses and studied the page in silence. His brows barely moved, his expression neutral, but I noticed the twitch of his eyebrow when he reached the clause about 70% if infidelity is involved. "This is unusual," he said at last, setting the paper down with deliberate care. "He thought it was funny," I said quietly, "that I might ever need protection from him." Richard steepled his fingers. "Your husband wrote this, voluntarily signed it, and dated it. Intoxication doesn't invalidate a contract in New York. The handwriting is his. A forensic expert would confirm it." In the right hands, he tapped the document lightly. "This isn't a joke. It's a weapon." My hands tightened around my coffee cup. "Then I want it sharpened." A slow smile tugged at the corner of Elena's mouth. She had that look I remembered from college, the look she got when she solved a problem before the professor finished asking the question. "Then let's get to work." The next 2 hours were a blur of legal language and strategy. Richard dictated clauses while Elena typed, her fingers flying across the keyboard. The original agreement Max had scrawled became the foundation. Layer by layer, they reinforced it. Emotional distress damages, specific provisions for any attempt to cause me public humiliation. Financial transparency, immediate penalties for hidden accounts or siphoned funds, conspiracy clauses, legal consequences for any party conspiring with him to inflict harm, including Jacob, asset division triggers. Whoever filed first determined the division, locking in the 70% if infidelity was proven. Every line they added turned Max's cruelty into my protection. He had written the script to humiliate me. They rewrote it to secure my future. When Elena finally leaned back, stretching her wrists, she looked at me seriously. "This will hold, but you need multiple authenticated copies. One stays here in our firm's vault. One goes in a safety deposit box under your name only. And I'd suggest one with someone you trust completely." "My mother," I said without hesitation. Max hadn't visited her in 3 years. He wouldn't think to look there. Richard nodded, sliding the new draft into a folder. "Mrs. Morrison, this agreement is now legally binding. But I should warn you, if your husband discovers what you've done before you're ready, he won't." The certainty in my own voice surprised me. He doesn't think I'm capable of this. Richard's gaze lingered on me, measuring the steel beneath my calm. Then he extended his hand. "Then let's make sure he never sees it coming." By the time I left the office, the cold December air bit at my cheeks, but I felt strangely warm inside. In my bag were notarized copies of the agreement, stamped and sealed. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying just groceries or errands or obligations. I was carrying power. Back at the apartment, Max was gone client lunch, he'd claimed. I moved quickly, hiding one copy inside a tampon box in the bathroom cabinet. Max never touched anything that reminded him of reality, especially feminine products. Another copy I slid into an envelope addressed to my mother. The third I tucked into my tote until I could rent the safety deposit box downtown. That night I opened the cheap marble notebook I'd started and wrote out everything. Every insult, every late-night absence, every cruel laugh. I catalogued receipts, dates, times, screenshots. The notebook filled with evidence, and each page was a promise he would not win. As I wrote, I thought about the man snoring on the couch a few nights earlier, laughing as he handed me what he thought was a meaningless scrap of paper. He believed I'd frame it, cry over it, cling to it like a child clutching a blanket. But I wasn't framing it. I was framing him. And he had no idea that his own hand had already signed the opening act of his downfall. The trick to survival wasn't hiding, it was watching, listening, recording, and Max, arrogant as he was, made it easier with every passing day. The first weapon I added to my arsenal came in a small Amazon box, a voice-activated recorder smaller than a pack of gum with a magnetic strip that let it cling to metal surfaces. Max never noticed me slipping it beneath the driver's seat of his BMW. To him, the car was a symbol of success, another toy to flaunt. To me, it became a surveillance booth on wheels. That very evening, while he claimed to be at a client dinner, the recorder captured everything, his voice dripping with disdain. "She's pathetic, completely oblivious, too stupid to notice anything." Jacob's laugh rang out in the background. "Man, how do you stand it?" And then Max again, smug as ever. "Not for much longer. After the holidays, it's a new life. Marina's different. She has ambition." The words made my stomach twist, but I didn't cry. Not this time. I transferred the recording to 3 separate encrypted cloud accounts, each with 2-factor authentication. Then I labeled it carefully in my notebook, December 10th, BMW recording, evidence of affair plus conspiracy. Technology became my closest ally. Max had insisted we share locations on our phones for safety. He forgot it worked both ways. Screenshots piled up him at hotels he never told me about, restaurants far from the office addresses that didn't match his excuses. Then came the discovery that almost felt like fate. His phone, left charging on the nightstand, stayed unlocked as long as it was connected to our Wi-Fi. While he showered, I picked it up, my pulse steady. Within seconds, I installed a discreet screen recording app buried among his dozens of unused apps. Every message he sent to Marina, every heart emoji, every whispered plan, they became mine before he even realized they'd left his phone. One message burned into my mind. "Can't wait for tonight. Same place. Tell them you're working late on Richardson." His reply wouldn't miss it. "She's clueless anyway." Each capture went into my vault, Google Drive, Dropbox, Proton Mail. Copies upon copies hidden where his ego would never let him look. But it wasn't just the digital world that betrayed him. Real life left paper trails. A crumpled restaurant receipt in his briefcase, $2,400 at the very place we'd celebrated our engagement. He told me he'd been at a medical device conference in Boston that weekend. I cross-checked. He'd never registered. Another day I found a business card for a mechanic in Queens. Max swore he'd spent $3,000 on transmission work. I called the shop. They had no record of our car. The money had simply vanished like so much else in our marriage. Every detail went into my black and white composition notebook. Page after page I wrote dates, times, amounts. My handwriting grew sharper with each entry, like I was chiseling truth into stone. Still I kept playing my part. At dinners I smiled. At work events I laughed politely. When his colleague Jennifer commented on my patience with Max's demanding schedule, I replied, "Marriage is about compromise, supporting each other's dreams." Max overheard, reached out to pat my head like I was a trained pet, and told Jennifer, "She's finally learned her place." My legs pressed so tightly together under the table that my muscles ached the next morning, but my face never cracked. Jennifer's uncomfortable glance told me she'd seen more than Max realized. Another witness, I thought, another thread in the web. By Friday, I took another step. At the Chase branch downtown, I rented a safety deposit box under my name alone. $80 a year. Inside, I placed an authenticated copy of the post-nup USB drives with recordings and a backup of every file I'd collected. I slipped the tiny key onto my keychain hidden among the others, just another piece of metal Max would never question. That night I cooked his favorite meal, ribeye, with béarnaise sauce, roasted vegetables, a bottle of wine from the cabinet he kept locked. He ate while scrolling on his phone, nodding with satisfaction, never suspecting that every cruel word, every lie, every betrayal was being catalogued. From across the table I studied him, the man who thought he'd broken me. He had no idea the quiet woman he saw was just a mask. The real work was happening in shadows he never bothered to search. I wasn't waiting for justice anymore. I was building it. The phone rang just after dawn, slicing through the fragile quiet of our apartment. I stepped into the hallway to answer, careful not to wake Max. His snores still drifted from the bedroom, thick with last night's scotch. On the other end, my mother's voice trembled. "Sweetheart, Grandma Rose passed in her sleep last night." The world tilted. For a moment I clutched the phone as though it could steady me. 91 years. A long life, yes, but no amount of time ever feels enough. "I'll be there," I whispered. My mother explained the funeral would be Wednesday in Connecticut, family only. Quiet the way Grandma had always lived, precise, intentional, dignified. When I told Max, he barely glanced up from his tablet. "Send flowers from both of us," he muttered. "I've got that Henderson deal closing this week." No hug, no sympathy, not even eye contact. Just another reminder of where I ranked on his list of priorities, beneath business, beneath his ego, beneath the women who wore the perfume I could still smell on his shirts. Wednesday came with a winter chill that clung to everything. The funeral was simple, reverent. My grandmother had planned it herself down to the hymns. We laid her to rest under a sky the color of steel. Afterward, as mourners drifted away, her lawyer, Mr. Garrison, approached me in the parking lot. His expression was careful, professional, but his eyes softened when he pressed a sealed envelope into my hands. "Your grandmother left specific instructions," he said. "This is for you alone." I sat in my car and opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a check and a note written in her looping script. "For my Zoe, your freedom fund. Don't let anyone clip your wings." The check was for $78,000, a lifetime of her careful saving, modest living, and shrewd investing. My throat tightened. She had seen more than I'd realized. Maybe she'd known. Maybe she'd suspected the prison I was living in. When I returned home, Max didn't even ask. He assumed my grandmother had nothing to leave, that my family had no wealth worth noticing. I told him she'd left me costume jewelry and photo albums. He grunted, already absorbed in his phone. His disinterest became my shield. The next morning, I opened a new checking account in my name alone. The statement went to a post office box I rented near Elena's office. The money sat there quietly waiting. It wasn't just cash. It was air, options, a future. I called it what Grandma had named it, my freedom fund. Meanwhile, Max's behavior grew bolder. With every passing week, he stopped pretending. Client dinner became his automatic excuse, tossed out without eye contact. He came home smelling of perfume collars stained faintly with lipstick. Watches began appearing on his wrist, first a Rolex, then an Omega, each one costing more than the cooking classes I'd once asked to take. "We need to be smart about money," he'd said back then, dismissing my dream with a smirk. Why waste $800 on a class when you can watch YouTube? But apparently, $15,000 timepieces counted as investments. At his birthday dinner in May, surrounded by colleagues, he decided to share his philosophy on marriage. 3 martinis and fork, raised like a scepter, he declared, "The key is consistency, like training a dog. Clear boundaries, immediate corrections, rewards for compliance." His colleague David forced a laugh. "You're joking, right?" "Not at all," Max said proudly, nodding toward me. Zoe here used to have all kinds of ideas: book clubs, art classes, constant social plans. Took some time, but now she understands her role. The table shifted uncomfortably. Sarah David's wife caught my eyes with something like horror. I smiled serenely, cutting my steak into even pieces. Marriage is about understanding each other. I said, my voice smooth, my blade sharp. And I understand Max perfectly. He missed the edge in my tone, too smug to hear it. That night when he fell asleep, I sat at the kitchen table, the envelope from my grandmother in my lap. The money was still untouched, but already it was transforming me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel trapped. I had leverage. I had choices. I looked around the apartment, our so-called dream home. His trophies, his leather chairs, his chosen paint colors. None of it felt like mine. But the Freedom Fund whispered a different truth one day. Soon it would be. Max thought he was untouchable, his future already written with Marina waiting in the wings. But I had something stronger than his arrogance. I had 78,000 reasons to prove him wrong, and the voice of my grandmother in my head reminding me, don't let anyone clip your wings. Sometimes betrayal doesn't come in whispers. Sometimes it sits in plain sight, bold, arrogant, convinced it will never be discovered. It was mid-December, just 2 weeks before Christmas. Max had been pacing in his study, deep in a conference call. He always got louder when he thought he was important, and his voice carried down the hallway like the clanging of a bell. On the kitchen counter, his laptop sat open. Spreadsheets filled the screen, highlighted cells and bar graphs from whatever deal he was pretending to close. I wiped the counter with deliberate slowness, waiting for the screen to lock. It didn't. A small notification caught my eye. Drafts, one unsent message. My stomach tightened. I shouldn't look. I already knew enough, but instinct told me this wasn't just another careless oversight. I clicked. The subject line hit me first. Christmas dinner entertainment. The recipient, Jacob. My breath froze in my chest as I began to read. Christmas dinner is perfect. Her whole family will be there to watch her fall apart. She'll beg me to reconsider in front of everyone. It'll be priceless. Already filed the papers last week. She's getting served right at the table. Make sure you record it. This will be better than when Tom surprised Michelle with those photos at Thanksgiving. The words blurred as blood pounded in my ears. I read them again and again. Entertainment. That's what I was to them. A spectacle, a punchline at the holiday table. But this time my hands didn't shake. My vision didn't blur. I pulled out my phone and snapped photographs from every angle, careful to capture the timestamp glowing at the bottom corner. December 11th, 2:47 p.m. Then I forwarded the screenshots to my secure accounts, encrypted and triple backed up. When Max ended his call and strode back into the kitchen, I was rinsing a dish, humming softly to myself. He never knew what I'd just seen. The next morning I sat across from Elena in her conference room. The email lay printed between us, its ink still fresh. Elena's face had gone pale as she read, but Richard, the senior partner, leaned back with the expression of a man who had just been handed a winning lottery ticket. "This changes everything," Richard said, tapping the page. "This isn't just divorce. This is premeditated emotional distress, conspiracy to humiliate, malicious intent. In court, it's dynamite." "But he already filed," I murmured. The words felt far away, as though they belonged to someone else. "That's why you're filing today," Elena said firmly. Her voice carried the same steel I remembered from our college days. December 21st, 3 days before his Christmas spectacle. According to the postnup he signed, whoever files first determines the terms. That means 70% to you, plus damages. His little performance. It will be legally meaningless. Her certainty steadied me. By noon, my petition was filed, stamped and entered into the record. The ink was barely dry when Elena slid the folder across the desk to me. "Congratulations," she said. "You just beat him at his own game." That night I walked through our apartment with a strange sense of calm. Max was on the phone bragging about some client dinner, no doubt arranging his next secret meeting with Marina. I set the table for dinner, folded the napkins just so, and thought, he has no idea. The days leading up to Christmas blurred into preparation. Max insisted on the best china, the long dining table, both families in attendance. "It has to be memorable," he said, smirking at me like he already tasted victory. He had no idea how right he was. At Nordstrom, I wandered past displays of sweaters and ties, my fingers brushing fabrics absent-mindedly. I selected a navy cashmere sweater Max had admired in October. I let him believe it was his Christmas present, the perfect prop. But the real gift, the one wrapped in heavy gold paper and tied with velvet ribbon, waited in my closet. Inside lay the arsenal, the notarized postnup he'd signed in drunken arrogance. Forensic accounting exposing the offshore account he thought invisible. Printed messages with Marina, each time stamped and authenticated. Photographs of them together, her wearing the jewelry I'd never seen. USB drives of recordings, his insults, his laughter, his conspiracy with Jacob. And finally my own divorce filing, December 21st, 3 days before his charade. I arranged the papers with surgical precision, each page sharp enough to cut. When I sealed the box, it looked like a gift, because that's exactly what it was. The gift of truth wrapped in consequence. On Christmas Eve, as Max laughed and drank with Jacob in the living room, I passed by quietly, my gold-wrapped box hidden where only I could reach it. They thought they were predators circling prey, but I knew the truth. Tomorrow at Christmas dinner, when Max stood with his envelope and Jacob's phone recording when he expected me to collapse, beg, and weep, I would smile. And then I would slide that golden box across the table and watch his world burn. Christmas Day looked picture-perfect: snow on the windowsill, turkey in the oven, ornaments glowing like jewels. I slipped on the burgundy dress Max had approved months earlier and practiced the expression he expected, shocked begging. Then I tucked it away. By noon, the apartment filled. My parents arrived first. My father already tight-jawed. My mother armed with cinnamon rolls and concern. Max's parents followed, polished and formal, his mother's pearls trembling with every nervous swallow. Sarah brought her boys, who rushed to the tree with noisy joy. Elena came last, officially my +1, but really the silent blade I'd kept sheathed for months. The table gleamed with china crystal and rosemary sprigs at each setting. Beneath my chair, hidden from view, waited the gold-wrapped box. Max played host as if it were a stage. He wore the navy sweater I'd given him that morning, carving turkey like a conquering hero, his voice carrying across the room. "Zoe's gone all out," he said. "What else would she do with her time?" Polite laughter rippled. My father's knuckles whitened. I touched his wrist. "Wait." Jacob sat with his shirt pocket positioned perfectly for the phone camera, peeking out. He grinned at me as if we were co-conspirators. I smiled back serene. Dinner passed in polite fragments. Stories, toasts, Max's digs disguised as humor. Finally he tapped his glass. The crystal note silenced the room. Before dessert he announced, "I have a gift for my wife." He withdrew a plain white envelope, circled the table with dramatic steps, and set it before me. "Merry Christmas, darling." I opened it. Divorce papers. Highlighted clauses. No assets. No spousal support. Immediate eviction. My mother gasped. Sarah whispered my name. Even Max's parents stiffened. I lifted my gold pen and signed. My hand didn't shake. "Your turn," I said, sliding the pen back. Max frowned. What I reached beneath my chair and drew out the gold-wrapped box. Heavy. Certain. I set it before him. "Open it." His smirk faltered. He tore the paper. On top lay the notarized postnup in his drunken scrawl, now legally bulletproof. His eyes snagged on the 70% in case of infidelity clause. "What is this?" he stammered. "Keep reading." Next came the forensic accounting offshore accounts, siphoned funds, fake car repairs. My father read a page face hard as stone, then the messages with Marina time-stamped and printed, followed by photos of her wearing the Tiffany pendant. Max's mother inhaled sharply, pearls trembling. A velvet pouch held a USB. The label read highlights. Inside lived his voice. "She's pathetic. She'll beg. After Christmas, new life." Jacob blanched. His hand twitched toward his phone. Finally, at the bottom, my own divorce filing, dated December 21st, 3 days before his show. Max's face drained. "You tricked me. I was drunk." Elena's voice cut in calm and cold. "Voluntary intoxication doesn't void a contract in New York. You signed it, dated it. It's binding." Jacob fumbled with his phone. Audio leaked Max's mocking words. My father fixed him with a look. "Don't delete a thing." Jacob froze. Max's father finally spoke, voice like iron. "How long?" 8 months, I said. Max shoved back his chair. "You can't do this. I'll fight." With what I asked stacking plates. "Your frozen Cayman account. The job HR is already reviewing." He looked around the table and saw only contempt, even from his parents. His bravado collapsed. "You set me up." "No," I said evenly. "You did. I just documented it." Silence stretched. Snow ticked against the window. My nephews shifted uneasily. I carried the plates toward the kitchen. "We should serve dessert," I said. "It would be a shame to waste the pie." Behind me, the gold box sat open under the chandelier, spilling its contents like proof of a crime scene. The show was over, and I was the only one left standing. The room stayed hushed long after the golden box was emptied. Papers still littered the table, Marina's photograph beside the gravy boat, the USB glinting under the chandelier. Max sat frozen, colorless, as if waiting for someone to hand him a new script. None came. It was his father who finally broke the silence. "Maxwell, get your things." Max's head snapped up. "Dad." Now his father said, voice like iron. No one mistook it for a suggestion. Max looked around the table, desperate for an ally. His mother's pearls trembled against her throat, but her eyes were hard. Sarah's husband shook his head slowly, disbelief written all over his face. Even Jacob avoided his gaze, staring down at his useless phone. Max pushed back from the table, knocking his chair sideways. "This isn't over." He spat at me. "Yes," I said, standing calm and steady. "It is." His father's hand clamped down on his shoulder, steering him toward the bedroom. "Pack a suitcase," he ordered. His mother followed her heels, clicking sharp as judgment. Through the half-open door, their voices cut like knives. His mother hissed, "A 26-year-old secretary." "Could you be more cliché?" His father, "You disgraced yourself and this family. On Christmas Day." Max muttered excuses, but his words bled weakness, not command. Back in the living room, Jacob shifted toward the door. My father stepped in his path. "The recording," he said evenly. Jacob's face drained. His thumb trembled as he pulled up the files showing each one being deleted. "There are backups," he mumbled. Elena crossed her arms. "By tomorrow morning, I want written proof every copy is preserved and produced to council. Any deletion will be treated as spoliation." "Understood." Jacob nodded miserably. He left without a goodbye. The slam of the door felt like an exclamation point. Minutes later, Max emerged with a half-zipped suitcase, his mother trailing behind him like a furious shadow. He looked smaller, hunched hair falling into his face. Nothing like the man who had tapped his glass 20 minutes ago, savoring the promise of my humiliation. He paused in the doorway, eyes flicking to me one last time. "You'll regret this," he muttered. I stacked dessert plates on the counter, my voice casual. The only thing I regret is wasting 7 years. His mother rolled her eyes. Move Maxwell. The door closed behind them with a decisive click. Snow kept falling outside, muffling his retreat, erasing his footprints almost as soon as they formed. Silence filled the apartment, but it wasn't heavy anymore. It felt clean, like the air after a storm. My mother reached for my hand, her grip fierce. "I knew something was wrong," she whispered, "but I never imagined you were this strong." I leaned against her shoulder, the truth of it still settling. For years Max had convinced me I was weak, that my worth depended on his approval. Tonight I had proven him wrong in front of every person who mattered. Sarah appeared at my side, half laughing, half crying. "That was insane. You own this building, Zoe. You're a legend." Her husband chuckled, shaking his head. "Your sister's his landlord. That's one for the history books." I exhaled a sound that turned into laughter, real unrestrained, bubbling up from somewhere I thought had withered. Soon Sarah was laughing too. Then even my father, the corners of his mouth softening for the first time all night. The absurdity of it all broke open when my mother announced we should serve the pie, and we did. Apple pie with vanilla ice cream eaten around the same table that had just hosted betrayal, revelation, and justice. The twins dug in, oblivious but happy, their sticky hands grounding us in ordinary life. For the first time in years, I ate without checking Max's expression, without shrinking to fit his mood. Each bite tasted like freedom. Later, after everyone left, I stood alone in the living room. The gold box still sat on the table, empty now, but humming with the weight it had carried. I touched the velvet ribbon, then the chair where Max had sat, and finally the window where snow still fell steady and silent. The apartment felt different, lighter, like the walls themselves had been waiting for this moment to breathe again. And so had I. The morning after Max left the apartment felt unnervingly quiet. Not the oppressive silence I'd lived with for years, but something different. Like the place itself was exhaling after holding its breath too long. I padded into the kitchen barefoot, poured coffee from the machine Max always said was good enough, and stared at it for a long moment. Then I grabbed my phone-searched espresso makers, and by noon had ordered the exact model he once dismissed as wasteful. If I was starting over, it would begin with the ritual of mornings that belonged to me alone. That was just the first change. The dove-gray walls Max insisted on, because neutrals show sophistication, felt like a funeral shroud. I bought paint swatches, taped them in the living room, and settled on a warm butter yellow that caught the morning light. By the time the first coat dried, the space looked alive. The bedroom went sage green, soft and grounding. The kitchen backsplash got hand-painted tiles I'd admired for years, but Max had called pretentious. Each brush stroke, each nail hammered into plaster for art I'd hidden away, was more than decoration. It was reclamation. This was my home now, not a museum curated for his ego. I unearthed the canvases I'd bought from street fairs and tucked into closets before he could mock them. Abstract bursts of color, jagged cityscapes, bold brushstrokes that dared to take up space. One by one, I hung them. The walls answered back with color and defiance. Plants came next. A fiddle-leaf fig by the window pothos, trailing from the shelves, basil and rosemary sprouting in the kitchen, living, breathing proof that care could make things grow again. Sarah visited on Wednesdays with her twins, no invitation necessary. We'd drink wine while the boys built towers out of blocks, our laughter filling the kitchen. One evening she confessed, "I wanted to speak up at your wedding. The way he corrected your vows, it made my skin crawl. But you looked so happy," and I told myself I was overreacting. Her honesty broke something open in me, but instead of pain, I felt gratitude. She had carried guilt. I'd carried silence. Both of us were lighter now. Book club resumed on Tuesdays. The women who had stopped inviting me, tired of Max's mocking comments about my frivolous hobbies, welcomed me back without hesitation. Bethany hugged me and said, "You look like yourself again." I hadn't realized how much of me had been missing until she said it. Even the small things felt revolutionary. I cooked elaborate meals or ordered greasy takeout without commentary. I danced barefoot in the living room to music Max had called noise. I laughed too loud, talked too long, and didn't check his expression once. The red cocktail dress exiled to the back of my closet made its return at Jessica's birthday party in January. The one Max claimed made me look desperate for attention. I wore it anyway, heels clicking on the rooftop bar floor. No one called me desperate. They called me radiant. They told me I looked free. Of course, freedom wasn't just in laughter and paint colors. There were legal battles still unfolding, accounts being reviewed, lawyers filing motions. But Elena handled most of it, her confidence a buffer that let me breathe. For the first time, I wasn't fighting alone. One snowy afternoon, I sat in the newly painted living room with a mug of coffee from my brand new machine. Sunlight spilled across the yellow walls, catching on the leaves of the fiddle leaf fig. I realized I was smiling unprompted, unforced. This wasn't survival anymore. It was living. The woman Max had tried to train into silence was gone. In her place stood someone who could choose color music company, someone who didn't measure her worth against a man's approval. The walls around me no longer echoed his voice. They held mine. And for the first time in 7 years, I felt completely, unmistakably home. 3 months after that Christmas dinner, winter still clung to the city like a stubborn guest. Slush lined the curbs. The wind knifed down avenues, and every building seemed to creak with exhaustion. Yet when I walked into the courthouse that gray March morning, I felt lighter than I ever had. The marble lobby smelled faintly of old paper and disinfectant. Elena met me at the entrance file folders stacked in her arms, her black coat crisp against the colorless morning. "Are you ready?" she asked. I nodded. Ready wasn't quite the word. Determined, maybe. Unshakable. Max arrived 10 minutes later, trailing his lawyer, a budget attorney who specialized in quick divorces and discount custody cases. Max wore a suit that had once been expensive but now sagged at the seams, the fabric tired, the tie crooked. His hair, normally trimmed to precision, had grown longer than I'd ever seen it. He looked like a man unraveling. He glanced at me across the hallway, eyes narrowed, but there was no swagger left, just bitterness and maybe fear. Inside the courtroom, the judge presided from a high bench. A woman in her 60s with wire-rimmed glasses and sharp eyes that missed nothing. The space was cold, clinical pews polished from years of restless hands, walls lined with flags and seals meant to remind everyone of order. We took our seats. Elena slid a copy of our evidence neatly onto the table, her expression calm, her confidence radiating like armor. The hearing began with procedural formality. The clerk read out case numbers, dates, names. Then the judge turned her gaze to Max's lawyer. "Proceed." The man cleared his throat, already sweating. "Your Honor, my client maintains that the post-nuptial agreement in question was signed under intoxication and therefore lacks validity. Furthermore, he asserts that Elena rose smoothly, interrupting, with the kind of timing only seasoned attorneys mastered. Respectfully, Your Honor, voluntary intoxication does not nullify a contract in this jurisdiction. Mr. Morrison not only signed and dated the document, but the handwriting analysis confirms his authorship. We also have recordings of him boasting about its terms, as well as corroborating testimony from witnesses. She handed up a packet with the efficiency of someone who knew the ending of this play before it began. The judge flipped through, pausing at the highlighted clauses, her brow furrowing only slightly. "Noted," the judge said. "Continue." The next 2 hours unfolded like theater, but for once I wasn't the one on stage. Elena presented the portfolio piece by piece, financial records exposing the offshore account receipts from jewelry bought for marina restaurant bills hidden as business expenses. Each item was authenticated, time-stamped, undeniable. Max shifted constantly in his seat, tugging at his collar, tapping his foot, shooting glares at me as though I had betrayed him by noticing his betrayal. The worst moment for him came when Elena played a clip from the USB drive. His own voice filled the courtroom speakers. "She's pathetic. She'll beg. After Christmas, new life." Jacob's laugh followed, tinny but clear. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Max's lawyer fumbled, muttering about privacy, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. "New York is a one-party consent state. This is admissible." I didn't look at Max then. I kept my eyes on the judge, on Elena, on the evidence spread across the polished wood like puzzle pieces clicking into place. When it was our turn to speak directly, Elena rested her hand lightly on mine. "Tell the truth," she whispered. "Nothing more. Nothing less." So I did. I spoke about 7 years of dismissal, the subtle erosion of confidence, the night he mocked me with drunken signatures. I told the court how I found the email draft labeled "Christmas Dinner Entertainment," how he planned my humiliation as though it were a game. My voice shook at first, but steadied as I went on. By the time I finished, silence held the room like glass. The judge leaned back, hands folded. Her eyes softened, but her tone remained firm. "Thank you, Mrs. Morrison." When Max was called to the stand, his bravado cracked almost immediately. His lawyer prompted him to claim coercion, misunderstanding, unfairness. Max stumbled over his words, contradicting himself, snapping when pressed. "Did you or did you not write this email?" the judge asked finally, lifting the printed draft. Max hesitated, then blurted, "It was a joke." The judge's eyebrows rose. "A joke you intended to carry out according to your own words." His lawyer buried his face in his notes. By noon, closing arguments had been made. Elena's was sharp and unflinching. "This is not merely a failed marriage, Your Honor. This is a documented pattern of financial abuse, emotional cruelty, and deliberate conspiracy to humiliate. My client not only deserves protection under the law, she deserves justice." The judge left for deliberation. 10 minutes later, she returned with her ruling. 70% of marital assets to Mrs. Morrison per the postnuptial agreement. Ownership of the apartment building remains with Rosewood Properties, LLC. Additional damages of $30,000 for documented emotional distress. Furthermore, a restraining order preventing direct contact will remain in place for 12 months subject to renewal. Her gavel struck wood. The sound rang like thunder. I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I simply breathed deep and full as though my lungs had been waiting years for permission. Max slumped in his chair, his face gray, his mouth opening and closing without sound. His lawyer muttered something about appeals, but even he didn't believe it. They both knew it was over. When Max finally stood, his shoulders hunched, his once commanding stride reduced to a shuffle toward the exit. He didn't look at me. Not once. Elena packed up the folders with crisp efficiency, then squeezed my hand. "You did it." "No," I said quietly. "We did." Outside, the city roared with its usual chaos sirens, horns, voices colliding in the cold air. But to me, everything felt sharper, brighter. The courthouse steps stretched ahead like a path into a new life. Elena hailed a cab and waved her smile, the first warmth of the day. I stood there for a moment, the wind biting my cheeks, and thought about Grandma Rose's note. "Don't let anyone clip your wings." My wings weren't clipped anymore. They were spread, and for the first time in 7 years, I was ready to fly. Spring sunlight spilled across the yellow walls of my living room, bright and warm in a way the apartment had never felt before. The snow had melted, buds were pushing through the soil of the potted plants I'd placed on every surface, and life pulsed in corners that once held shadows. 3 months had passed since the gavel came down in court, since the judge's ruling gave me 70% of the assets' ownership of the building, and something far more valuable than money: freedom. Max was gone, his voice no longer echoing through these rooms, his scorn no longer shaping my days. At first I thought the victory itself would be enough, that justice served clean, sharp, and undeniable would fill every empty place inside me. But with each passing week, I discovered something even deeper. Peace didn't come only from winning, it came from letting go. I still remembered the way Max's face crumpled at Christmas dinner, the stunned silence of the family, the way the golden box spilled his lies into the light. I remembered the courtroom, Elena's steady voice, the recordings that turned his arrogance against him. Those moments had power. Yes, they were the climax of one of those true revenge stories people talk about in hushed voices, a tale of patience and strategy paying off. But true healing came later in quiet mornings, with coffee and laughter shared with Sarah on Wednesday nights, in planting herbs on the balcony and watching them grow. Healing wasn't just about proving him wrong, it was about proving to myself that I was enough with or without anyone's approval. One evening, as I sorted through old boxes, I found the composition notebook where I'd recorded every cruel word, every receipt, every betrayal. My handwriting looked sharp, almost carved into the pages, each entry a wound I had turned into evidence. I sat on the couch flipping through it slowly, page after page. Then I closed it, carried it to the kitchen, and slid it into the recycling bin. Not because I wanted to forget forgetting wasn't possible, but because I no longer needed to hold the proof. The truth had already done its work. A verse I'd once memorized in Sunday school came to me clear as sunlight. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. John 8:32. For months, truth had been my weapon. Now it was my release. The night Max tried to destroy me, I thought revenge would be the sweetest reward. But time taught me another lesson, one whispered through every corner of my rebuilt life. The sweetest reward was freedom, freedom to laugh without fear, to dream without ridicule, to live without chains. That's when another saying I'd once heard echoed in my mind. He who laughs last laughs best. It wasn't about mocking Max. It wasn't about rubbing salt into his downfall. It was about realizing that the final laugh, the deepest joy, belonged not to the one who humiliated, but to the one who survived and thrived. And yes, there was a moment when bitterness tempted me, when I imagined sending him photographs of the apartment now glowing with life, or of myself in the red dress he'd once ridiculed, laughing with friends who truly valued me. But then I remembered another truth. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Do not take revenge, but leave room for God's wrath. Romans 12:17-19. My revenge was never about destruction. It was about reclaiming dignity. And once dignity was restored, forgiveness could finally take root. Forgiveness didn't mean excusing what he did. It didn't mean welcoming him back or erasing the years of cruelty. It meant loosening the grip his shadow had on my heart. It meant choosing not to let his voice be the one echoing in my head anymore. The greatest victory wasn't watching Max lose. The greatest victory was learning I no longer cared whether he won or lost at all. By summer, the apartment was unrecognizable. Warm colors, thriving plants, walls filled with art. Friends came freely, laughter spilled across the rooms, and I rediscovered pieces of myself I'd buried long ago. When I hosted a New Year's Eve party the following year, the place overflowed with joy. Elena brought her new boyfriend Sarah came with her family. Even Patricia from Max's old firm showed up with a smile and a bottle of champagne. At midnight, I stepped onto the balcony with a glass of sparkling wine, the city erupting in fireworks around me. Gold, silver, red bursts of color lighting up the sky. I thought of the girl I had been trembling in the hallway with a tray of appetizers overhearing her husband betting on her humiliation. And I thought of the woman I was now standing tall in her own home, her own life surrounded by people who saw her worth. I raised my glass to the sky. This is my life now, my story, my ending, and my beginning. Then I turned back to my guests, to laughter and music, to warmth and light. Because the truest revenge was never the box, the courtroom, or even the eviction. The truest revenge was becoming myself again, whole, free, unafraid. And that I realized was a story worth telling. So if you're watching this and you've followed me through every twist and turn, ask yourself, what's your moment of truth? What's the chain you need to break the voice? You need to silence the freedom waiting for you on the other side of fear. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what part of this journey struck you the most. Because stories like this don't just belong to me, they belong to all of us who have ever been underestimated, silenced, or told we weren't enough. This was one of those true revenge stories, but it's also a story of survival, of dignity, and yes, of forgiveness. Hit that like button if this story gave you strength. Subscribe for more stories of justice, resilience, and hope. And remember, revenge may be a dish best served cold, but freedom. Freedom is served warm at a table full of love.